It's KBIA 91.3 FM, Thinking Out Loud and the Thinking Out Loud podcast. This coming Tuesday, November 14th, a couple of events going to be going on at the State Historical Society of Missouri, a film screening in the evening, and then what ought to be a really fun conversation about the archives involving a couple of old Missouri politicians. And joining us to talk about both of these is Beth Pike, who is Assistant Director of Communication and who we've seen here many times before. Hi, Beth.
Great to be here.
And Laura Jolley, who is the Assistant Director of Manuscripts. And Laura, welcome. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
I wanted to, Beth, start with you. We're going to go kind of backwards. The screening
Sure.
is in the evening and the other thing is in the afternoon, but I want to give you a quick chance to talk about this screening. People, this is going to be something that Ozarks Public Television has put together, a documentary. It's called Generations, African American Experiences in Springfield and the Ozarks. And as somebody with very deep roots for a lot of generations in that region, I know that there are not a lot of black people there, and there is a history of a lot of racism and a lot of sundown towns. But this is looking at some of the people who were there and some of the stories they bring to the table.
Absolutely. Many people don't, like you say, think about blacks having long-time roots, but there are many families that made huge contributions to Southwest Missouri. So this film is a new documentary created by Ozarks Public Television, and we're really excited to bring it to our audience here in Columbia. We're going to have the film director, Dax Bettel, who directed the film for Ozarks Public Television, and one of the there's multiple people obviously interviewed for it, but Christine Peoples is going to be here to join us, and she's in the film, and so we're excited to have both of them here to talk a little bit after the screening too, and have a conversation on it.
And that's going to be at 6 o'clock. This is, again, Tuesday, the 14th. And I encourage people to support public television because there's all kinds of great stuff like this coming up there. And
There certainly are.
You know, I'm a radio guy, and you should give to KBIA, but I encourage people to support this as well. And so that screening will be happening at the State Historical Society.
And I might mention, too, the film screening is actually going to be at 6:30. So we're going to have some food, a reception from 6 to 6:30. And then the film starts right at 6:30. So if people come, they'll get fed a little bit, and then they can watch the film, and we'll have a conversation right after the film's over with.
And then earlier that day is going to be the event that Laura's here to talk about. It's called Following the Paper Trail of Dewey and Danforth, and it's an examination of a couple of politicians. Dewey, short from Galena, who's a fascinating guy. This may not be a name people recognize. He was from a small town in the Ozarks, was in the U.S. House for quite some time, spent a little bit of time as chair of the House Armed Services Committee, best known as a really fierce opponent of the New Deal, and then John Danforth. And Laura, as you're going through these papers, we talked about two guys from different eras, both Republicans, but one from a small town, Senator Danforth, obviously from St. Louis, but they also had some interesting things in common.
Yes, I think in terms of what they did for Missouri, some themes that come up regularly are what to do about water management and flooding for both the congressman and the senator. That is, which is why we have Table Rock and flood control in Southwest Missouri today. Like you said, he opposed every New Deal program.
Yeah,
But he was proud of that. But this was a project that I think that he knew would benefit his constituents. That and Social Security.
Sure.
That was another area that he went ahead and it pained him to do so, apparently, but he did it.
If people don't recognize the name for any other reason, when you get to Galena and it's kind of the north tip of Table Rock Lake, there is a Dewey Short Visitor Center that's really beautiful. And so that's kind of a way his name is remembered. Senator Danforth from a different era, but also a man that was very well educated, also a minister, and obviously was a part of Missouri politics and U.S. politics for a very long time.
Yes, I think what was so fun for me just going through Danforth was revisiting the early 90s and learning some things. It's kind of both with Dewey Short. We weren't alive for that time, and so we were learning a lot about socialism, communism. Healthcare, of course, was coming up at this time. Had no idea that people did not like Harry Truman, the difference between Truman and Eisenhower. So all that is there in the records. Danforth, however, I was around for. And so when I'm in the papers and particularly listening to his radio programs, he had a program called Keeping in Touch, and he would talk to reporters and answer their questions. And just what was going on with TWA. What was going on with Supreme Court nominee Robert Bork. I mentioned it to my dad. Do you remember Robert Bork? And he said, yeah, that's where the term getting borked comes from.
Sure.
And I had no idea. So I don't know really where my head was in 90, 91, 92, but I wasn't paying attention to what Danforth was doing. So it was great to learn and revisit all of that.
Dewey Short was known as a tremendous orator. He was a fan of big words and alliteration, and just a really terrific speaker. As we talk about these men, though, I'm going to let you save some of the good stuff, the really interesting stuff about these guys for the event next Tuesday at noon over there at the State Historical Society. But I want to hear just a little bit about your work in all of this. You get into a room with boxes and boxes and boxes of paper and tapes, and some of it is going to just be roll call. I second the motion to approve the minute. How do you get through all of that and find the good stuff?
Right. Thankfully, the Society of American Archivists did create a book for us to read on what we can keep and what we can sample and what we can get rid of. So very grateful to them for creating that book for us to follow. These grants that we got to process this huge amount of material, altogether for the 2 grants, it's going to be about 2,500 cubic feet of records. So the Dewey Short was the smallest at 98 cubic feet, and Danforth was well over 300. So yes, we are facing down a lot of file folders. I always tell my staff, you just start with one box at a time. If you look at the whole collection, it's overwhelming and you don't know what to do. So you dive in one box at a time. And then the records unfold and explain themselves. I think what was challenging for us is that what I don't think people realize, it is not the congressmen and women creating the records necessarily. They have a staff. And the staff changes, and we have to figure out who those people are and what their filing system was. The bulk of the papers are actually really their legislative work, their campaigns, and their correspondence. Dewey Short in particular, his constituency wrote to him, "Dear Dewey," or sometimes "Honorable Short," but it was almost like they were his best friend or his neighbor, just writing a letter. Please support this, that, and the other. Vote against this. Complaining about the Democrats and what New Deal is doing to the country. So it is almost like he actually knew every person in his district.
And there were a lot of really hot button things going on in Dewey Short's time. This was a time when civil rights was coming up, and there was a lot of conversation about that. And he took some stances on that issue that I'm sure there were some people that weren't very happy with. We talked about the New Deal. The time he was on armed services was right after Korea. He was on armed services for a while, but he chaired it there for a couple of years in place of Carl Vinson when Republicans held the House for one term. So there was a lot going on that was quite controversial. I'm sure I'm sure you found some interesting letters and correspondence.
Throughout all of this, there are things going on that people are becoming very emotional about and engaging with government because there is so much change, and civil rights being one of those, and during the Truman administration.
We are talking with Laura Jolley, Assistant Director of Manuscripts at the State Historical Society, Beth Pike, Assistant Director of Communications for the State Historical Society. Both of the events we're telling you about here are going to happen on Tuesday, November 14th. So this next Tuesday, the screening of the film will be at 6:30, and the event to talk about the paper trail of Dewey and Danforth will be at noon. Real briefly before we wrap up here, Laura, what did you find, and it could be either one of these or both, what did you find that kind of surprised you? Because you had to go into this having at least a basic idea of who these guys were and kind of what they were best known for.
Right. I think with Dewey Short, that personal correspondence he received from his constituents, violence and the real fears that people had regarding socialism and communism, and their hatred for Truman were very surprising to me. Danforth, a moderate Republican, really tried to work with everyone to do good things for Missouri and the country. His relationship with Thomas Eagleton, United States Senator Thomas Eagleton, was
Right.
one thing that I loved learning about Danforth. He's kind of like the dignified statesman. I think that's how we see him today. But his personality and his sense of humor really comes out in that relationship with Eagleton, and you see that in the papers.
I found as I read a little bit more about Danforth how close he came a couple of times to being the vice presidential nominee
Right.
for the Republican Party on two different occasions, and really would have been interesting to see how all of that happened. But it also almost didn't happen at all. His first U.S. Senate election in 1976, he probably would not have won if Jerry Litton had lived.
I think you're right.
I and I just
I think you're right.
and we've got two people from the Historical Society, and I just dropped Jerry Litton's name, and we could spend another 20 minutes on that topic alone. But people can come in and find out a lot more about these two fascinating Republican congressmen and senator from a different time, but both from here in Missouri, and that will again happen Tuesday, November 14th at noon, and then the screening of the film. The event will start at 6, and they'll say roll them at 6:30 for that one. Also on November the 14th, again, it's Generations African American Experiences in Springfield and the Ozarks from our friends at Ozarks Public Television, and you can find out more about all of that at shsmo.org, which is the website for the State Historical Society. Laura Jolley from Manuscripts, Beth Pike, we're just really happy to have you both here, and thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for your time, and just to remind everybody that both events are free. So,
Oh, great. All right. That ended up on 12, but